Good evening everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 5th November 2025 and here is the list of topics that we are going to discuss in today's session. And the first topic with which we're going to start this session is about India and Israel relations. And this is very important from Gender Studies paper 2 syllabus point of view. And if we talk about India and Israel relations, first of all, we need to look into the brief historical background of the relations between India and Israel. And we all knew that both India and Israel, they share civilizational ties or civilizational relations. And in fact, the relations between India and Israel, so they are also dating back to centuries. And in fact, if you look into the relations between India and Israel in the past, so they are ranging from trade and the peaceful coexistence of Jewish communities. For example, Cochin Jews and Bene Israelis in India. And after India's independence from 1948 to 1991, so if you trace the evolution of India-Israel relations, immediately after India's independence, India recognized Israel in the year 1950 itself. However, India refrained from full diplomatic relations with Israel after 1950. However, India has not fully recognized Israel because of some reasons. One reason is India's support for Palestinian cause. The second reason is India's excessive dependence on the Arab nations or Gulf nations for its oil supplies and also labor markets. The third most important reason, India's commitment to non-alignment movement. Because of all these reasons, India refrained from having full diplomatic relations with Israel. You need to remember these three reasons because at that point of time, India was considered as the leader of non-alignment movement. And in fact, right now also India has been excessively dependent on Middle East for its labor market and also oil supplies. And India is still committed to a peaceful two-state solution and coexistence of both Israel and Palestine peacefully. However, the limited contact of India with Israel existed through Israel's consulate in Mumbai as well. However, after 1992, it is important that by 1990s, so Soviet Union fall and end of Cold War, that has led to a change in the orientation of relations between India and Israel. So with the end of Cold War, India's economic reforms also started in the year 1991 and they are also known as LPG reforms, 1991 LPG reforms. So in 1992, India and Israel have started or launched a full diplomatic relations and they were established in January 1992. So therefore, this full diplomatic engagement between India and Israel has marked the beginning of a deeper cooperation in number of areas including agriculture, defense and technology. This is the brief historical background of India and Israel relations. Now let's understand the evolution of partnership right from 1992, where India and Israel have established a full diplomatic relations. Now there are some areas where India and Israel have been cooperating in a close and friendly manner. Firstly, defense and security cooperation. And in fact, India and Israel relations, defense is considered as cornerstone of this relationship because Israel is among the India's top 3 arms suppliers as of now. Israel has been supplying arms and ammunition to India. Apart from that, Israel is also among the top suppliers and it has been supplying Barak 8 missile system, Heron unmanned aerial vehicles and the Spider missiles as well. So therefore, India has been sourcing all these different weapon systems from Israel. And similarly, counter-terrorism is also another major pillar of India and Israel cooperation. And intelligence sharing is also another very important area. However, during Kargil War of 1919, Israel provided vital equipment to India when US denied to provide equipment or assistance to India. And in fact, if you look at India and Israel annual defense trade, it now exceeds $2 billion. So this is how the defense cooperation and partnership with Israel is very important for India. Agriculture is also another very important dimension where India and Israel have been collaborating in a very close manner. In fact, Indo-Israel Agriculture Project, which has been launched in the year 2008, and this project has established over 30 centers of excellence across India. And similarly, this cooperation in the agriculture has mainly concentrated or focused on areas such as drip irrigation, precision farming, and greenhouse cultivation. So these are the areas where India and Israel have been engaging in a very closed fashion. And then science and technology and innovation is also another very important area of cooperation and engagement. Now, in fact, both these countries have established I4F fund, and this fund has been established in the year 2018, and this fund's objective is promoting research and development in emerging technologies including artificial intelligence, robotics, cybersecurity, and healthcare. So all these domains Israel has achieved tremendous success, and they also have a technology. So therefore, the technology in these areas will help India. Secondly, India and Israel collaborate through innovation hubs linking Bangalore and Tel Aviv. So this is how India and Israel have been collaborating on science, technology, and innovation front as well. So let's understand the economic and political engagement of India and Israel. Now, if you look at the bilateral trade between India and Israel, it has increased from $200 million in the year 1992 to $7.5 billion by 2023. There has been a significant increase in the bilateral trade between India and Israel. However, still there is a large scope for further enhancing the trade between these two countries. And in fact, both India and Israel have been negotiating a free trade agreement. If free trade agreement comes into existence between India and Israel, the trade will increase manifold. However, there are regular high-level visits as well between India and Israel. And this is evident from the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi paid an official visit to Israel in the year 2017. In a similar way, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, he also paid an official visit to India in the year 2018. So regular high-level official visits further strengthened bilateral relations between these two countries. And in fact, India and Israel are also members of I2U2 grouping. This is also known as Western Quad. And in fact, in I2U2 grouping, there are members like India, Israel, UAE, and USA. However, there are certain challenges in India and Israel relations. So let's try and understand the challenges between these two countries. Now, in fact, the major challenge is balancing India's West Asia policy. Because for India, West Asia is very important in terms of labor markets and oil supplies. But on the other hand, Israel is having the conflictual relations with most of the West Asian countries. So because of this reason, India has been finding it difficult to balance its West Asia policy, Middle East and Israel together. Now, in fact, India continues to support Palestine while maintaining ties with the Arab states as well. And apart from that, regional instability is also another major challenge for India. Recently, Hamas-Israel conflict, and that has further created diplomatic sensitivities for India. However, if you look at the trade between India and Israel, it is just over $7 billion US. Despite a significant potential of increasing the bilateral trade between India and Israel, so the trade is reached only $7 billion US. So therefore, over-reliance on defense and diamonds, it limits the diversification of bilateral trade relations between these two countries. However, if we talk about the convergence and future prospects of relations between India and Israel, now in fact, in terms of defense technology, joint research and development in drones, AI defense systems, so there's a huge scope and potential for further strengthening relations in the area of defense. Secondly, water and climate cooperation, because there are projects like desalination and wastewater recycling. So these projects should be further carried out as well. And in fact, India is working on renewable energy, and India is also requires technology which actually reduces the cost of generating renewable energy. So therefore, both India and Israel would collaborate in the arenas of solar energy and green hydrogen production. Now, in fact, in India, we also have National Green Hydrogen Mission. And we also have certain objectives under the National Green Hydrogen Mission, and we would like to make India an export hub of green hydrogen. So therefore, in this aspect, the collaboration between India and Israel would be very helpful. Cybersecurity is also another domain, and in fact, expanding digital defense cooperation will also strengthen the cybersecurity of both India and Israel as well. So however, if you want more details on this, you can also trace the evolution of India and Israel relations under various prime ministers as well. However, under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there is a strategic shift in relations between India and Israel. So I hope you have understood the challenges, convergence, evolution, historical background, and the current relationship between India and Israel. This is very important for Gender Studies paper 2. So next important topic is about POCSO Act. Now in fact, POCSO Act is also known as Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. And this act has been passed with the objective of protecting children from the sexual offences. And this is very important for your Gender Studies paper 2 mains examination. And this is the syllabus which has been given in the UPSC. Now, so let's understand what is this POCSO Act, what are the key features, how the POCSO Act is misused, and what should be the way forward. So let's understand this. So as I have already told you, POCSO Act, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences, this is a legislative enactment that was passed in the year 2012. And in fact, the aim of the POCSO Act to protect and safeguard children who are below 18 years of age from the sexual assault, harassment, and exploitation. Now here you have to remember 18 years. So those who are below 18 years of age, they are identified as children under the POCSO Act. And in fact, the POCSO Act provides comprehensive, gender-neutral and child-friendly legal framework for investigation and trial of sexual offences against minors. Now in fact, I hope you have understood what is comprehensive. Comprehensive in the sense that it covers a wide range of sexual assault, harassment against children. Gender neutral in the sense that both male and female, so every girl child will be treated equally under the POCSO Act. Similarly, the provisions of the POCSO Act are also child friendly in nature. Now let's understand the key features of the POCSO Act first before going into these details. Now first, let's understand the objectives of the POCSO Act, and with these objectives, the POCSO Act 2012 has been passed. Now the first very important objective is protecting children from the sexual offences. And then POCSO Act also establishes special courts for the speedy trials. So therefore, there will be no delay in delivering justice to these victims. Third, to maintain confidentiality and dignity of child victim. So these are the three important objectives with which POCSO Act has been passed. So let's understand the major provisions of the POCSO Act. Now in fact, the POCSO Act defines offences such as penetrative sexual assault, which has been defined in section 3 of the POCSO Act, and section 7 talks about the sexual assault against children, and section 11 talks about the sexual harassment against children. And in fact, these are three major provisions which are part of the POCSO Act. It talks about penetrative sexual assault, and sexual harassment. However, the POCSO Act has provided for the stringent punishments so that it will be a strong deterrent against those who are committing crimes against children. And in fact, the punishment also includes imprisonment up to life as well. And apart from that, under the POCSO Act, reporting is considered as mandatory for offences under Section 19 of the POCSO Act. And in fact, there is also a punishment for false complaints under Section 22. However, the most challenging issue within the POCSO Act is a misuse of the provisions of the POCSO Act. Since it is a very stringent in nature, very often POCSO Act has been misused. And apart from that, within the POCSO Act, there are child-friendly procedures as well. The child-friendly procedures including recording evidence in camera, avoiding repeated cross-examination, and also ensuring psychological support as well. And in fact, these are the procedures which are considered as child-friendly in nature. However, let's understand some statistical trends in this context. So, however, in recent times, there has been a rising incidence of POCSO cases or sexual harassment, sexual assault against children. Now, if you look at the data into the Light Index 2025, India saw 94% rise in POCSO registered cases from 33,210 in 2017 to 64,469 in 2022. So this is how there is a significant jump in the POCSO cases. And in fact, National Crime Records Bureau data, it also shows that crimes against children rose by 30.8% between 2017 and 2022 as well. So this data has been indicating that there is a significant jump and increase in the POCSO cases in India. However, if you look at the case disposal, because the POCSO Act has also provided for the special courts for the speedier trial and justice. As of March 2023, over 1.3 lakh cases were pending under the POCSO Act. However, around 1 lakh had been disposed so far. And in fact, there are some states where the pendency of the cases is very high. The states including UP, Bihar and Madhya Pradesh. However, the prosecution rates even exceed 90%, though conviction rates remain low due to the poor investigation as well. So this is how the case disposal is not satisfactory under the POCSO Act. However, the most pressing challenge is misuse of the POCSO Act. So let's understand how POCSO Act has been misused. Now, in fact, if you look at the nature of misuse of the POCSO Act, this act is essential and important, but there are instances of false and motivated complaints, and they have been surfaced in recent times as well. For example, the consensual teenage relationships. And in fact, those who are below 18 years of age, so they are going into this consensual teenage relationship. However, these relationships are very often criminalized since the act treats all sex below 18 years as a statutory rape under the POCSO Act. Secondly, custody disputes, because parents very often file POCSO charges to harass each other. Third, property or financial conflicts. So, with respect to property or financial conflicts, false cases used to extort or gain leverage. So therefore, this is how the POCSO Act has been misused for a number of reasons, right? So very often parents may misuse POCSO Act. Sometimes for property or financial conflicts also POCSO is misused, and in fact for consensual teenage relationships also POCSO Act has been misused. However, let's understand some judicial examples of misuse of POCSO case. Now, in Allahabad High Court 2023, one of its judgment observed that the act has been a tool for exploitation in adolescent love cases, because increase in the social media and other reasons. Now, as of now, those who are above 15 years of age, they are also into a consensual teenage relationships. However, the POCSO has become a tool for exploitation in adolescent love cases as well. This is what the Allahabad High Court has observed in 2023. And in fact, Delhi High Court in 2023 has also fined a woman 1 lakh for filing a fake POCSO case in a property dispute. Secondly, the Kerala High Court in the year 2024 quashed a frivolous case filed by a mother in a custody battle. In Bhopal 2025, local police found 85% of the POCSO cases are false with only 24 convictions out of 169. So therefore, the conviction rate is also very less, and it has been indicating that the provisions of the POCSO Act are grossly misused. So these are the judicial examples, and those examples show us that the provisions of the POCSO Act are being misused. However, let's understand the consequences of misuse of the provisions of POCSO Act. Now, in fact, the dilution of law's credibility if POCSO Act continues to be misused for various other reasons. And in fact, if anybody is falsely accused, they will go through trauma and social stigma as well throughout their life. And in fact, the judicial burden and delay for the genuine victims is also another major consequence of false accusations or misuse of the POCSO Act and its provisions. And apart from that, if the fabricated complaints are filed against any children, so it may cause psychological harm to the children as well, because those who are 18 years are also considered as a child. Now let's understand the implementation challenges of the POCSO Act. So we have understood that there is a very high pendency of cases with respect to the POCSO Act. Even though the POCSO Act has provided for the special courts for the speedier trials, but the special courts are inadequate in nature. And then we need to talk about poor investigation quality. So apart from poor investigation quality, lack of forensic support and witness protection as well. And most of the people have no awareness about the POCSO Act. Now, in fact, police have no awareness about the POCSO Act, families don't know about the POCSO Act and child-friendly provisions as well. And in fact, the POCSO Act has also provided for a rigid definition which criminalizes even the consensual adolescent relationships as well. So these are the major implementation challenges of POCSO Act. Now I hope you have understood this POCSO Act, its provisions, challenges, and how it has been misused. The next important topic is about surrogacy ban that has been imposed on India. In India, and recently Supreme Court has decided to review surrogacy ban on couples with one child. Now in fact, this is important for UPSC Gender Studies paper 2, right? So in fact, this is not the syllabus, and in fact, social justice, and in Gender Studies paper 1 also Indian society. So for these topics, surrogacy is very important. Now let's understand what exactly is surrogacy. So if we talk about surrogacy, the Supreme Court of India has recently decided to examine whether Section 4 Clause 3 and Subclause C and Clause 2 of Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021, it prohibits married couple. Imagine that there are two married couples and they have a biological or adopted child from opting for surrogacy, right? So in fact, it prohibits married couples with a biological or adopted child from opting for surrogacy, and it violates the constitutional right of reproductive autonomy. Now in fact, reproductive autonomy is a constitutional right that Supreme Court has identified, but if the married couple, if they have an adopted child or a biological child, so they are not eligible for surrogacy, opting for surrogacy, and therefore it violates their constitutional right to reproductive autonomy. So therefore, this is what Section 4 Clause 3 Subclause C and Subclause 2 talks about the married couple and their right to opt for surrogacy if they have a biological or adopted child. So therefore, Supreme Court is going to examine this provision of the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021. And in fact, this case involves a couple suffering from secondary infertility. Secondary infertility actually means that if couple have a first child and they may face a lot of difficulty having a second child. So this is what is called as secondary infertility. So therefore, it has revived the debate over the balance between individual reproductive rights, state-imposed restrictions in India's surrogacy framework. Now in this, we'll understand in detail surrogacy and the implications of this provision which has been included in the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021. So let's understand in a very brief way what is surrogacy. Now, in fact, surrogacy is actually an arrangement. Now, in this arrangement, woman, who is also called as surrogate mother, agrees to carry and deliver a child for another person or a couple, and the couple are known as intending parents. However, the woman who agrees to carry or deliver a child is known as surrogate mother. Now, in fact, if you look into the evolution of surrogacy regulation in India, now in India, surrogacy was a very common, and because of this reason, India was once called as hub for commercial surrogacy. However, even though once India was a hub for commercial surrogacy, there was lax regulations, and the lax regulations leading to ethical concerns and exploitation of surrogate mothers. And in fact, the Law Commission in 228th report, it has been submitted in the year 2009, so it has recommended ban on commercial surrogacy and promoting altruistic surrogacy. So altruistic surrogacy is surrogacy within a family. Now, in fact, this led to the enactment of Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021, and this Surrogacy Regulation Act 2021 aimed at protecting surrogate mothers and also ensuring ethical practices. So this is how surrogacy has been evolved in India over a period of time. So let's understand the key provisions of Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021. Now, if you look at the key provisions of Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021, so first of all, we need to look into the eligibility criteria for surrogacy. Now, in fact, only Indian married couple, so men should be aged 26 to 55, women should be aged 23 to 50, are eligible to have the surrogate child. And in fact, the eligible couple must have no living biological, adopted or surrogate child. Right? So this is an exception, and except existing child is mentally, physically challenged or has a life-threatening illness. So in this case only they can have a surrogacy. Otherwise, if they have a biological child, even one single child, even if they have an adopted child, they cannot go for surrogacy again. Now let's understand the type of surrogacy which has been permitted in India. Now, in fact, only altruistic surrogacy is allowed. Right? So in this altruistic surrogacy, no financial compensation except medical expenses would be provided to a surrogate mother. However, in India, commercial surrogacy is strictly prohibited. So let's understand the conditions for the surrogate mother. Now, in fact, a surrogate mother should be a married woman aged 25 to 35 years of age with at least one child of her own. And in fact, it can act as a surrogate only once in her lifetime. Right? So apart from that, if you look at the institutional mechanisms, national and state surrogacy boards to monitor implementation have been established. And Assisted Reproductive Technology Act of 2021, it complements this law to regulate fertility clinics and ART procedures as well. So therefore, the Surrogacy Regulation Act has provided a detailed guidelines about the surrogacy in India, and it has also provided for the institutional mechanisms as well. So let's understand the current Supreme Court's case with respect to reviewing Section 4, Clause 3, Subclause C and 2. Now, what is petitioner's argument in this context with respect to the secondary infertility? As I've already explained to you what exactly is a secondary fertility. Now, secondary fertility, inability to conceive a second child after successful earlier pregnancy. Now, in this case, Mohini Priya argued that state cannot intrude into private reproductive choices because it is against their right to, it violates their right. Now, in fact, Advocate Mohini Priya also contended that the definition of infertility under the ART Act and Surrogacy Act is not limited to the primary infertility alone. So therefore, the advocate requested the Supreme Court to read down Section 4, Clause 3, Subclause C and 2 to include couples with the secondary fertility. So they can also now go for the surrogacy because of secondary fertility. So this is the argument made by Advocate Mohini Priya, and Supreme Court will examine this. Now let's understand the government stance on this. What is the government stand? Now, in fact, Union government defended the provision's constitutionality and stating that surrogacy involves the use of another woman's womb, hence cannot be fundamental right. Secondly, it is a statutory right subjected to some restrictions as well. And in fact, the Constitution does not confer a right over another person's body as well. So therefore, the government in this case has emphasized that restriction prevents misuse of surrogacy when couples already have a healthy child. However, the judicial observations, if you look into it, Justice B.V. Nagaratna, so she termed the restriction reasonable in nature, pointing to population concerns as well. And in fact, Justice B.V. Nagaratna has also clarified that this does not amount to a one-child policy. But in fact, we have a huge population, and population control is also very important, but it ensures that surrogacy is used only for exceptional cases, and it should not be used for any case, because otherwise it will lead to the exploitation of women. So therefore, let's understand the issues and concerns in the current surrogacy law. So if you look at the issues and concerns in the current law, so there is a restrictive definition of eligibility, who are eligible for surrogacy and who are not eligible. Now in fact, couples with the secondary infertility, they are excluded, though the condition is medically valid and emotionally distressing as well. So therefore, the contention of the petitioner is the government should recognize secondary infertility as an eligibility ground for surrogacy. Next, reproductive autonomy versus state control. Now in fact, it violates Article 21, right to personal liberty, by limiting reproductive choice and bodily autonomy of a woman. Third, and ethical and practical challenges in implementing the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021, because surrogates' rights and post-birth responsibilities remain poorly defined in the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021. And apart from that, there is a clear absence of norms for same-sex couples if they wanted to have child, single parents and foreigners, because all these groups of individuals have been excluded from the definition of having or eligibility of having a surrogate child. Now in fact, the Surrogacy Regulation Act is also inconsistent with adoption law as well. Under Adoption Regulation 2017, couple can adopt up to 3 children, but surrogacy is restricted to those without any child. So therefore, there is an apparent policy inconsistency which is existing as well. So these are issues and concerns in the current surrogacy law. So I hope you have understood the surrogacy issues, provisions, and the Supreme Court's intention to examine the provision. So that's all for today, and thank you so much. So please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like our video. And if you have any doubts, any suggestions, please write those suggestions in the comment section. Thank you so much.